Things are heating up around the Denver Broncos, and we need to talk about something very important. We know how much excitement there is around this offense, and man, the Broncos cannot afford to get this wrong. I really want to see Denver in the Super Bowl, personally. That is the dream, and why not this year? Jalen Waddle is finally back at practice. Bo Nix is expected to play against the Green Bay Packers, and now Broncos country has a big question to answer. Some fans want to see Waddle on that field immediately, even if it is only for one drive, so he and Bo can start building that game connection. Others believe there is absolutely no reason to risk him in the preseason, especially with that huge Monday Night Football matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs waiting in Week 1. I want to know which side you are on. If Waddle is completely healthy, should Sean Payton let him play against Green Bay? Or should Denver protect him and save everything for Kansas City? Write your opinion below. And if you've been a Denver Broncos fan for more than 15 years, hit that like button hard. Alright, let's talk about Jalen Waddle. Now, let's get right into this, because the biggest news coming out of Monday's practice was exactly what Broncos country had been waiting to see. Jalen Waddle was back on the practice field, and more importantly, he did not appear to be limited. That matters because Waddle had been dealing with muscle tightness somewhere in his leg. The exact area was not identified, but Denver clearly decided to be careful with him instead of pushing the issue. That was understandable. This is preseason football, and there's no reason to turn a manageable physical issue into something that could cost a player meaningful regular season games. But Monday gave us a very encouraging sign. Waddle wasn't simply standing around in a helmet watching everybody else work. He stayed with the wide receivers after the team stretch. He ran routes. He caught passes from the quarterbacks. He participated in team drills. He worked in 7-on-7 and 1-on-1 periods. And then came the part that should really get Broncos fans excited. Waddle caught touchdowns from Bo Nix during practice, including in 7-on-7 and teamwork. That is the connection everybody wants to see. The question now becomes whether Sean Payton will allow us to see it Friday night, when Denver faces Green Bay in the second preseason game. There are good arguments on both sides. If Waddle is truly healthy and Denver's medical and coaching staffs believe there is no reason to hold him back, giving him some game action with Nix makes sense. Nobody is saying Waddle needs to stay on the field for an entire half. It could be one series, maybe one drive, maybe just enough snaps for Waddle and Nix to experience the timing and speed of a real game together. That could have value, especially because this is also expected to be Nix's first game action since the injury against the Buffalo Bills. Practice matters, but game action is different. The timing is different. The physicality is different. The quarterback has defenders coming after him without the protection of a practice environment. The receiver has to work against defenders who are trying to stop him for real. That is why even a small number of snaps could be useful. And imagine the reaction inside the stadium if Nix finds Waddle early. Even one completion would give Broncos country something to get excited about. If they connected for a touchdown on the opening drive, the atmosphere would probably explode. But Denver also has to think beyond Friday night. The Broncos are preparing for a very difficult beginning to the regular season, starting with the divisional matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football. The first 6 games are expected to be physically demanding, including a Week 5 game against the Chargers, followed by a short week before facing Seattle in Week 6. That is why there is absolutely no reason to take an unnecessary risk with Waddle. If there is any doubt about his leg, Denver should be careful. The simple way to look at it is this. If Waddle is fully ready, let him get a few reps. If he would be considered questionable under regular season conditions, there is no reason to put him on the field for a preseason game. The encouraging part is that Monday did not look like the practice of a player who was struggling physically. Sean Payton also does not seem overly concerned about the chemistry between Waddle and Nix. His point after Monday's practice was that these guys throw together and work together a lot. There's still time for that connection to develop naturally. And that tells us something important. Denver does not need to force anything. If Waddle plays Friday, it should be because he is healthy and because the Broncos believe those snaps can help prepare him for the season. It should not be because they feel desperate to manufacture chemistry. Payton's approach to training camp also remains demanding. After the first preseason game, there might have been a thought that Denver would begin backing off. That does not appear to be the plan. The Broncos were scheduled for full pads Tuesday and Wednesday before changing the pace, with a walkthrough-style practice Thursday ahead of Friday's game.
Payton wants his team building what he describes as a callus for the regular season. In other words, the Broncos need to become accustomed to the physical demands now because those demands are not going away once the season begins. And Waddle is not the only player giving Denver encouraging news. Marvin Mims Jr. is also making progress. Mims returned to practice last week and was back Monday wearing a helmet and jersey. He participated in some individual work with the wide receivers before moving to the side field for rehabilitation work and then observing the remainder of practice. So he is not all the way back yet, but he appears to be getting closer. And there is another development that might not create the same excitement as a star receiver returning, but it could be extremely important for this offense. Luke Wattenberg is back at practice. Wattenberg suffered his injury on the first day of padded practice, and Monday represented another step forward because he participated in individual drills. If we were talking about a regular season injury report, that type of workload would likely resemble limited participation. The expectation discussed was that Denver could gradually build Wattenberg back up rather than immediately throwing him into everything. Whether that means he plays against Green Bay remains uncertain. There is an argument that getting him some work Friday would be valuable because he has already missed around 2 weeks of on-field work with the first-team offense. Those repetitions matter for an offensive line, especially at center. At the same time, Denver could continue bringing him along carefully, potentially preparing him for the following preseason game against Minnesota and making sure he is ready for the regular season opener. The good news is Denver suddenly has more stability at center. Alex Forsythe was back and took the team repetitions with Bo Nix and the offense during Monday's practice. That is significant after a period in which the Broncos were dealing with injuries throughout the center depth chart. And there was another encouraging development from Denver's first preseason game. The offensive line protected Jarrett Stidham extremely well against Atlanta. Obviously, one preseason performance does not guarantee that protection will look the same against every opponent. Different defensive coordinators bring different pressures, different fronts, and different talent. But it was still a positive sign. Calvin Throckmorton handling work at center becomes less frightening when the offensive line shows it can keep the quarterback clean. And that protection is going to matter because there are other areas of this offense that Denver should try to explore against Green Bay. The biggest one might be the young tight ends. Against Atlanta, the Broncos got plenty of blocking work from the tight end room, but there was not much passing volume going towards some of the younger players. That needs to change. Justin Joly is one player who deserves opportunities in the passing game. Dan Villari is another young player Denver can continue evaluating, while Caleb Lohner's situation remains something to watch. Evan Engram already